Good morning and welcome to Conversations with Buddy. We record these podcasts at the podcast recording studio here in Kaiser, Oregon. We drop a new podcast every Friday morning with a new story that will impact someone. We hope that someone is you. Please take a moment to give us a review, hit the subscribe button, and also share this podcast episode with your friends, family, and on your favorite social media platform like Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn maybe too. We want to get these messages out to the people and impact the world one testimony at a time. This morning, I'm excited to introduce my friend, Bryce Funk. Bryce, welcome.
Thanks, buddy. Excited to be here.
Well, I'm glad you're here, man. And I don't know you well, but we're going to get to know you a lot better today. I've met you a few times.
Yeah.
I think I saw you recently at a coffee shop with a couple guys. Was it Matt Masser and Rick Saffield?
Matt Masser and Rick Saffield.
That's a rough crowd, man. I'll be praying for you on that one. No, I love those guys. So
they're great.
I knew that day when we agreed to do the podcast, it'd be awesome.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Those two guys are incredible. Yeah.
Well, so before I introduce you real quick, what was your goal there? Because I know you're in video production. What was your goals that morning?
Yeah. So I work in video production. And the goal there, Rick does a really great job with all the social media stuff. And so the goal there is I get to work with Matt Masera and go out in the streets and go out to Wallace Marine Park and be, just out with Matt and Beeble Street Ministries as they're getting to impact people's lives. So just taking what we're capturing there and getting that to Rick so that Rick can get that out to the rest of the world. It's awesome.
Because you're doing the video of Beeble Street and then Rick's putting it on social media and doing that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a new fun partnership. I've known Rick for a while and got to see the stuff he's done. So it's fun to circle back and get to do some more stuff with him again.
He's a great guy. Well, hey, let me introduce you and have people get to know who you are. So Bryce, you've been married for 4 years. Who's your wife?
Brooke.
Would you call her your better half?
She is definitely the better half. Maybe the better 3/4 even. Yeah.
Hey, that's even better. Hopefully Brooke will appreciate that. So you and Brooke foster. You've had the pleasure of fostering your current kiddo, an incredible 5-year-old boy, for just over 1 year. What's your little boy's name?
Yeah, AJ.
AJ. And he's 5.
Yeah,
okay.
just turned 5.
Cool. We'll talk about that, the fostering. You've grown up in church and very thankful for that. You currently work in video production, as we just talked about, focusing mainly on documentary, film, and stories in hard-to-reach places, overseas, the homeless community, etc. God is doing incredible things with the next generation through media. We'll talk about that. I wasn't always in media. My degree was in applied mathematics, but I left academia in my last semester of grad school. That's interesting. You made it all that way.
Yep.
I'm sure there's a story.
There's a story for sure.
And then, so here's a question for you. So your favorite passages of Scripture are 1 Kings 19 and James 1:27. What does 1 Kings 19 say?
So 1 Kings 19, Elijah's fleeing. There's a beautiful lead up to it. He's out in the desert. He takes a nap, an angel wakes him up and is like, you got a long journey, eat some food. He goes a little farther and ends up in a cave. And the Lord speaks to him and says, hey, go up on this mountain. I'm going to pass by you. And there's a great fire, there's an earthquake, there's a great wind. And the Lord's not in any of that. But all of that fades away and the Lord shows up as a gentle whisper. And I remember my high school. I grew up in Southern California. I was in a high school youth group down there. I remember one Wednesday night at youth group. We were talking about silence and solitude, and so we read 1 Kings 19, and then the church was kind of nestled up, almost up in the hills above the town, and so there was just a ton of just open land behind the church. And so I was like, hey, we're gonna read this, and then just go walk around and have some quiet time. And up until that point, I'd never really felt God really spoke like a tangible or audible word to me. And I just remember sitting there, just walking around. I've always spent a lot of time outside and backpacking and all that stuff. And I just remember walking around in the forest there. And I just remember there was this silence and stillness and this quiet that was, you can sit in a quiet room and it's quiet. But, when there's this absolute stillness and silence that, after reading that passage, I was like, this can only be from one thing. And just an incredible joy and just comfort, that I felt in that silence. And so that scripture for me, I think, in the hardest things I've gone through in life, seeking out that solitude and that silence has been a big thing for me.
Yeah. What's Psalm 46:10 say? It says, be still and know that I'm Lord. or stop striving.
Yeah.
Be quiet. Listen. We're so fast paced, man. Go, 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 go.
Totally.
We actually don't listen to really what God is speaking to us through his word.
Amen.
Okay. James 1:27. What does that one say?
Oh man, that's a beautiful one. I have it open because the last thing I want to do is misquote this one. So it's at the very end of this first chapter of James, and James just he doesn't hold any punches. He just kind of opens up chapter 1. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. And I think that was the passage for my wife and I that really stirred our hearts to get into foster care.
Yeah.
And then even just kind of expanding our side of like who's an orphan. A lot of the New Testament talks about being like adopted into sonship.
Amen.
And so, obviously we have a kiddo in our home right now who's in the DHS foster care system. But also, I mean, there's so many people out in our community that are spiritual orphans.
Yeah.
And so, how do we or spiritual widows?
Yeah.
How do we look after those people and keep ourselves unstained?
Unstained. That is a great verse, man. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about you. You grew up in Southern California.
I did. I'm sorry. Sorry.
We won't hold that against you. It's all good. But you're here in Oregon now. And It's all good. Walk us through that journey of, I know something happened around, age 7?
Yeah.
So walk us through where you're born, what town you lived in.
Totally.
And I think you guys were, you'll probably get to it, but I think your dad was a 49er fan or something like that.
My dad was a 49er fan. I think might be an important distinction there. I don't know if he still is.
Okay.
But,
all right. So I just know the story. So where'd you grow up and there's a story.
Yeah. So I was born in a little town called Claremont. It's like 30 miles southeast of Los Angeles. It's nestled right at the base of the San Gabriel Mountains. So I'd open up like my front door and walk outside, and there's the tallest mountain, and one of the tallest mountains in Southern California was like right outside my window. But I grew up, I have 2 younger brothers. My parents have been married for like over 30 years now. But when I was 7, my dad was in law enforcement. And after almost 20 years on duty, he was in a motorcycle accident, messed up both of his wrists. And for about a year, like he couldn't even, like hold like a 2-liter bottle of soda and like pour it out. His wrists were pretty messed up. But for me as a 7-year-old, I'm like, sweet, dad's home all the time. It was a really cool, I think, era of my life. And looking back, like my dad was always at, all of our soccer games, all of our events. Cool
dad, man.
Totally. Yeah. It was really cool to be able to have him there. But, there's, this struggle in the background of like, it's hard for dad to work right now, and so that was always a little bit of a struggle. And I think looking back, I think so much of who I am today is because of that. My grandfather, my dad's dad, and my dad's brother, they were all in photography. My grandfather actually took photography from Ansel Adams at the LA Art Institute. And so there's some really cool stories of seeing this thread of media and photography throughout throughout the generations of my family. So after my dad was injured, about a year later, he started working in stock and assignment photography, which, this is like at the transition of film into digital. And so it was really, I remember, going on shoots and like, helping move, get gear out of the closet and help load it up. And then, everything, my world growing up was all, a lot of photography and a lot of video and a lot of just media and creating things. And so, but I think something's, the big impact in my life, I would say, and I think, leading to my dad being a 49ers fan, is no matter how hard, anything got with, financially, because I mean, he would, I think the accident was in like 2003. So like 5 years later is 2008, and so that there's a lot of stuff happening there for everyone,
Yes.
And so I remember every single Sunday, my dad had this leather checkbook cover that, was a 49ers checkbook cover. And he would pull it out, of his pocket at church every Sunday, and he'd write a check, and he would either put it in the plate or he would give it to one of either me or one of my brothers to put in the plate. And that's no matter how hard anything got, every Sunday, just that faithfulness of, the Lord's going to provide. And so now I remember, I'd always think about that moment, but never really realized how much that imparted into me until, it was the first week. AJ's actually, we've had a total of 3 foster kiddos, and we've had him, we got certified and got AJ on the same day. And so we've had him and a couple others. And I remember the first week we had him, I had some book in my hand. It was like a cookbook or something. And I'd closed it and just kind of tossed it on the couch. And he picked it up and just kind of like threw it on the couch. And I was like, "Oh, hey, bud, like let's not toss books around. That's not good for the book. It's going to hurt the book." He's like, "Oh, I'm just trying to copy you." And I was like, "Oh, dang it." Like kids are watching every single thing you do. And so I don't think I really realized, like, seeing my dad and seeing my parents and their faithfulness growing up, like I took in all of that, and so much of how my parents raised me and how my parents lived, so much of that is ingrained in who I am today. So, yeah.
So what it sounds like is words are important, but actions are even more important.
Totally.
Specifically for kids in this area. I want to hear more about that story, but so you grew up in Southern California. When do you move to Oregon?
Yeah, so we moved to Oregon in 2012, so I've been here for a little over 10 years now.
Yeah, okay.
And it was one of those things, it was just really cool to see God's provision. Yeah. My parents' plan was to retire the east side of Central California in Bishop. And I remember back 2010, 2011, we were talking about Oregon because we had gone. One cool thing about my parents being photographers is back in that era of photography, you'd get like an email of from a magazine or a stock company. They'd be like, "Hey, we need photos of these 3 things." And so, my parents were not ashamed of taking the kids out of school. And so they'd load us all up, load us all with camera gear, and we'd go on family trips all the time. We'd take 2-3 weeks in the summer. And 2 summers in a row, we came up and did like a Pacific Northwest. We did a Pacific Northwest one, like up into Washington and the Olympic Peninsula. And then the next year, we just did Oregon. And I remember my dad grew up in SoCal. Like my mom she's a pastor's kid. They moved everywhere. She's been at all 50 states and she's lived in like 15 of them. But my dad grew up in Pomona, which is right next to Claremont. And he lived in the same like 5-mile radius his whole life.
Wow.
And his parents owned a TV shop in the downtown. And so, he loved, kind of that, you think of like you watch a movie, that takes place in the 80s, like that golden era of the downtown scene. And I remember we were on a road trip up here and we stopped in Corvallis. And my dad was like, "This feels like Claremont's downtown did when I was a kid." Mm-hmm. And so we were looking at houses. I was in Boy Scouts. I did my Eagle Scout project in Yosemite. And then we took a road trip up here to look at houses in Corvallis. And I remember looking at stuff and didn't find anything. But then the realtor was like, "Hey, we know you weren't looking in Salem, but we found this house in Salem. You should check it out." My dad flew up, checked it out, and we were like, sold, and moved up here. Yeah. It was awesome.
2012. Okay.
2012.
Yeah. And they obviously got a good deal on a home because I was right at the very tail end of the crash. And the market was probably still very low back then.
It was good, man. They were super blessed to have that. And yeah.
It's crazy. Mm-hmm. And you were, at that point in time, so that was 11 years ago, you're 15?
Yeah, I was like middle of high school, tail end of high school. So I did most of my, all my schooling in SoCal then. And then when we moved up here, I was like, I just want to be homeschooled. I don't want to. Yeah. I don't want to deal with going to high school again. First day of high school again. I don't want to do that.
No, thank you. So last couple of years, you're homeschooled, graduated. Where did you go to college at?
Yeah, so I went to Chemeketa.
Okay.
So I started Chemeketa like my last year of high school, which is great. Met a lot of really good people there. Yeah. Got involved with multicultural student services. Met some believers there, and so it was a really good move going there. And then did 1 year at Oregon State after finishing everything up at Chemeketa. And And then, hey, I see you got that shirt on.
Yeah.
And then transferred out to Memphis and finished my degree in Memphis. And that the story attached to that is my wife was getting her master's in Memphis. We weren't married at the time. We weren't actually engaged at the time. But I was like, I want to marry you, so I'm going to go to Memphis. And so I went out there, finished my degree, and that's where I started my master's.
Yeah. Well, how'd you meet your wife? You started dating her. She lives where? Does she live in Oregon?
Yep. Yeah. So my wife went to Corbin. So she finished up, and then she stuck around here. And then we met. We were both working at REI, the outdoor gear store in Kaiser there. we both met there, and we started dating like 7 years ago now. Yeah, so we met there, dated for a few years. We had broken up for like 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
And then ended up working a bunch of stuff out, figuring out what we wanted, and then getting back together. And as we're, like broken up, getting back together, she's like auditioning for universities to get her master's in violin performance. And so as she's, trying to find places to go, I'm like in the, behind the scenes, like, can I get my degree here too? And so she ends up getting accepted and getting a really good scholarship to University of Memphis. And so, yeah.
Tennessee's pretty cool, isn't it?
It was interesting. It's not a place I think I would live again.
Okay.
But I'm very thankful for the 2 years we had in Memphis. Yeah. It was beautiful.
Okay. So she's out there getting her master's in violin performance.
Yep.
You're also working on your master's.
I was also working on my master's. Yeah.
What was your undergraduate degree in?
It was applied math as well.
Oh, that's right. Applied math. And then the master's, what was that? Also in applied math?
Yeah, master's is applied math. My goal for the longest time, before I got into media was I loved math. I loved how, going back to my, all the things my dad has imparted into me. When my dad was in law enforcement, he did accident reconstruction, which is like showing up to a crash.
What happened?
And doing a bunch of math and figuring out how fast was this person going, what was happening. And so, that was a cool introduction to me of how math can actually be useful and not just like John has 47 watermelons and he does this,
Some story problem.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And so that was a really cool introduction. I remember my first math professor at Chemeketa, I just remember being in his class and he just presented math. He'd open up every single class with like a weird math like fact or like fun problem that answered a cool thing. And so I remember being like, yeah, this is really cool. This is what I'm going to do. So I went out there, did applied math in my undergrad, and then my graduate degree was also going to be in applied math.
Yeah.
So
your goal was to kind of maybe follow in Dad's steps and be a cop and do accident, whatever you called that.
That I thought that would have been interesting, but my main goal was I love being outside. When I worked at REI, I was a guide for them. So I actually worked out of the Salem store, but also up in the Portland store and got to take people out to Smith Rock, guide people up Mount St. Helens. And so I really wanted to take math and like apply it to the natural world. So I was studying how like sediment is deposited in rivers as rivers flow. So it was super interesting work. And so the university was paying for my degree. So I basically had to finish my thesis in like 2 more classes. This was in my last semester. And as I was working through grad school, just to kind of help make some money, I picked up a camera and was doing portraits of musicians. My wife is in the music department, and all these musicians are, creating their websites and, sending out to go to other universities or get gigs or whatever. So I started, Memphis is a beautiful city, tons of old architecture. And so it's a really fun way to go out and photograph people. And photographing musicians is interesting because, you're photographing, there's a person in the frame, but, there's also an instrument. And so you're trying to capture, what's this person's relationship with their saxophone or their violin or their cello or whatever. So, it was a really fun, and you just get to talk to people and hear, a lot of these musicians have been playing since they were like 5, 6, 7 years old. So they got a lot of history and a lot of really cool stories. And I just really loved that. And so my second to last semester, I started being like, what if I did more of this, and just kind of asking that. But I was still like, math is where I'm going. This is the thing. Like math was the thing that got me up in the morning. And I remember one day towards the end of the semester, just kind of praying through like, God, what do you really want me to do with my life? Because the stuff with this camera seems to really be, really be taken off. And I don't know what you want me to do. And I just remember waking up one day and it was like, I could not care less about mathematics. It was like, the only explanation is God, because it was very much this like, wow, you took that passion away. It is gone. And I was like, it's the middle of semester, right? I got to finish this,
Yeah.
And made it through that semester. And then that would have been the fall. So winter break, we flew back to Salem to spend Christmas with our families. And my uncle passed away, my dad's brother. And so my wife and I ended up driving down. He still lived in SoCal. We ended up driving down to SoCal to help my dad with some stuff. And I was like, babe, if it's okay, I'm going to stay behind with my dad.
Yeah.
She was like, absolutely. And so she flew back to Memphis, and I I stayed in California for a couple of weeks and emailed my professors and was like, I'm sorry guys, I'm not coming back. And so that was the moment where I was like, this is, I guess it's media.
Yeah.
So I still think at that time I had the fail safe of like, I have a bachelor's degree, and I was like, I've got one semester left. If something, if I was like, oh man, that's not what God was saying, I could go back, but it was this moment of like, I'm not finishing this semester, and then my wife finished up her stuff and we moved back to Salem and haven't opened up a math textbook since.
Okay, so you're in Southern California realizing you're not going to finish your mathematics degree.
Mm-hmm.
When do you and your wife get married? When do you propose? And when do you get married? Where do you get married?
Yeah. So that's actually a really good story. So before we left for Memphis, we had broken up for a while.
Yeah.
We still stayed in contact. We were still meeting probably. We took a month where we didn't talk, but then we were still meeting a couple times a week and just talking through like, I did this wrong and you did this thing and it hurt me. And so I ended up working out a bunch of stuff. And I had this crazy experience one night where, when we had broken up every single day, I just wrote her a little letter. And I did that every night before bed. And I'd written her a letter and then just kind of prayed and journaled some stuff. And I remember it was the most like distinct, the biggest place I think God has showed up even to this day. Where I go to sleep that night, and I had this dream. It was a surreal dream where we'd been texting, my wife and I, we were dating at the time, obviously. We had been texting and we were going to meet up the next day.
Yeah, here in Salem.
Yeah. So we're still in Salem at this point, and we were planning on meeting up the next day, and we hadn't planned it anywhere we were going to meet or whatever. And I had this dream where we were meeting at Riverfront, could see her super vividly. And there's there's no sound. I could just see her. We're very obviously at Riverfront. And then I heard God say, when you see her tomorrow, tell her this. And it wasn't anything like mind blowing. And I should have looked it up. I don't remember exactly what it was. He's like, tell her this. And then I woke up and my journal was right there. And he's like, write it down. So I woke up, wrote it down. I was like, that's weird. And then went back to sleep. And so she texted me the next morning. She was like, hey, how about we meet at Riverfront today? And which is funny because we had a lot of hard conversations at Riverfront. So that was not usually a place she would ask to go. Mm-hmm. And I was like, all right, okay, Riverfront. And then she rolls up and she's wearing the exact same thing she's wearing in the dream. And I'm like, this is weird. And then at some point in that conversation, I ended up saying what God had asked me to say. And nothing there wasn't like a lightning from heaven or anything or a bright flash, but I said it. And then we finished up, got in my car, and I was like, okay, what's going to happen? And it wasn't until a couple weeks later that we ended up getting back together. And then even months later, I think after we'd actually gotten engaged, where she was like, that one day at Riverfront, you said something. And that was the moment where I thought we should get back together. And I was like, oh, wow. Well, that came from a dream I had, so that was really cool. But we got married. So all that to say, I felt like God was telling me, like, if you guys are going to get back together, you're going to marry this girl. So before we moved to Memphis, we're not engaged or anything. I had a ring made. Mike Perchenko made my wife's ring. So picked that up, left it in Salem because I knew if I had it with me, I would not wait to propose.
Uh-huh.
And so we had planned her brother, oldest brother, was stationed in Germany. So we were going to go visit them over Christmas break. And I was like, oh, it's perfect. I haven't met him yet. I'll meet him. I'll propose over there. It'll be beautiful. We were going to the Canary Islands. And right before we were supposed to leave, like 6 weeks before, I had ended up proposing. We were living in Memphis. I proposed there. Just couldn't wait.
Couldn't wait.
Good
for you.
Yeah. And so we were all set to go to the Canary Islands. And then we looked at our itinerary and they had accidentally canceled one of our flights. We were stuck in the Azores, this tiny island chain in the middle of the Atlantic. We were going to be stuck there for 5 days. And so they were like, well, we can totally refund you. We can move your trip up and do some stuff, or we'll pay for you to stay on the Azores for 5 days. And we were like, that sounds like a cool option. So we ended up, talking, figuring stuff out. We knew we wanted to get married. my wife had the best roommate, who ended up, they're still some of our closest friends to this day. So we ended up, my grandfather who lives in Illinois, was a pastor. He came down, married us, we eloped, and then took a little free honeymoon.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It's a good story.
That was a great story. You guys get married. You're now live in Salem.
Mm-hmm.
How long have you guys been married again?
4 years.
4 years. When did you decide to begin to foster kids?
You know, it actually started before we got married. We were at Church on the Hill on Mother's Day. And we'd always, you know, kind of in our relationship talked about like, we'd love to adopt, or, you know, like we've never really felt like God has called us like, you know, I want you to have, you know, natural born kids.
Yeah.
You know, we've never really felt like we've had that call or had that desire. Mm-hmm. But there was a Mother's Day at Church on the Hill where they had set up a panel of moms that were speaking. And one of those moms was Malia Witham. She's a case manager over at Salem Angels right now.
Yeah.
And at the time, her and her husband had just taken in like 3 infants, like all under a year, out of the foster system. And she gave a super impactful message on the panel of like, hey, like there's a huge need. Like right now in Oregon, there's half as many foster homes as there are foster kids. Wow. You know, so you just think about that. Like we only have 1 kiddo in our home, but that means there has to be homes with multiple kiddos, and those people, you know, we need more homes, and those homes need support. And so there's this whole like, you know, like Salem Angels does great work. I know Valor just picked up Safe Families. And so like, you know, there's this whole, you know, there's such a big need for people that can help. They can help in the foster system, because these kids, these orphans need, you know, they need loving homes, you know?
This goes back to your verse in James 1:27, take care of the orphans and widows. I mean,
totally.
I get it, man. And you have a heart for that. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay. And we've had him for a year. For 1 year.
Yeah.
He's 5, so you got him at 4.
Yep.
Sounds like he's just a great kid.
He's awesome. You know, it was a crazy transition for us. We were in Scotland last year at the end of February. So we had started in 2021, we started the process of working with DHS to get, you know, there's like 8 training classes you have to do. There's a pretty extensive interview process and a home study process. And that took us a little over 6 months to go through, or just the application process takes 6 months. And it was another 6 months to finish up all the classes and finish the application process. So it's like, it is time consuming. And so we were nearing the end of our 6 months that expired while we were in Scotland. And so we ended up, we got home from Scotland on like a Monday night. So we got home at like Tuesday morning, like 2 a.m. I started working at Church on the Hill Tuesday at 10, showed up for a staff meeting. And then the next week we got AJ, our kiddo. Yeah, we got a text from our certifier that was like, hey, you're certified. You're all good to go. You're in the system now. And then at 4 p.m., she called us back and was like, hey, we've got a kiddo, a 4-year-old little boy. Like, are you guys interested?
Oh, my goodness.
And we're like, here we go.
Here we go. You better be ready.
It's hot off the press. And, I still remember we were living in a apartment at the time on the top floor. Yeah. And I still remember the case manager pulling in and AJ getting out and putting on his backpack and just kind of like walking up the stairs, and like walked in, like took his backpack out. If you ever meet him, he's the politest kid you'll ever meet.
I want to meet AJ.
He walks in, takes off his shoes, takes off his backpack. I was like, hi, I'm AJ. He's like, he'll shake your hand. Like he's the politest little kid. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Love him to death.
Wow. Will you guys eventually adopt him then as your own, or what will that look like?
Oh man, that's a convoluted story. So I won't get too much into it because it'll take up a ton of time.
No.
But so DHS, there's this act called the Adoptive and Safe Families Act, and it basically stipulates that if a kiddo's in care for like 15 to the last 22 months, they're supposed to go into adoption. It's basically, that part of the act just tries to keep kids out of care and get them in safe homes as quick as possible. There's a caveat in there, about DHS or whatever agency making reasonable efforts with birth parents and all that stuff. And so in Oregon, there's basically 3 types of permanency. There's adoption. Most people are familiar with adoption, but there's also guardianship, and there's durable and permanent guardianship. And so AJ will go into like a durable guardianship,
Okay.
which means there's still like mediated contact with his family and all that stuff. So
Got
it's
it.
not quite adoption, but in theory, he'll get to be in our home for hopefully ever. But yeah.
Well, just keep praying through that. That would
Yeah.
be awesome.
Yeah, it's awesome. Man, the system, it's one of the, there's a lot of folks that will talk about like, it's so broken. But, the more you flood that system with good people, the less broken the system
There
seems.
you go.
So,
Showing up.
yeah.
So encouraging people out there to pray about getting involved in fostering kids.
Totally. Yeah. Or even, there's so many other ways to support, like Salem Angels, they have, what Salem Angels does is they come in and they partner foster families, foster homes with, they're called Love Box families. Like essentially, I don't want to speak on their behalf, but essentially, like families or individuals that are willing to, bring meals or do some respite care or babysitting just to help give foster parents a relief. That's been super nice. We have a Love Box family, and then even like Safe Families. I know like Isaiah Burrell is taking on a lot of that, just helping out, coming alongside, parents with kids and kiddos and making sure that, like parents are mentored and just kind of shored up in every way they need to be so that they don't lose their kiddos and those kiddos go into the system, and so that, they can get a break, when they need a break, and they can get the help that they need. So there's tons of ways that you can help in the system without actually having to get into, deep into the system.
Yeah. When we get toward the end of it, I'll get your contact information so somebody could actually reach out, maybe have a conversation with how they would get involved in fostering or come alongside
Absolutely.
of a foster family,
Yeah.
which is fantastic. Well, this has been cool. Let's talk a little bit about what you do for a career.
Totally.
You mentioned that you were at a staff meeting at Church on the Hill.
Yeah.
I know you do video media. Do you also work at Church on the Hill?
I did work at Church on the Hill for about a year when their previous creative director stepped down and I stepped in, as an interim spot there. Worked there for about a year. Got to be with Bruce and Jason all the time.
Love those guys, man.
It's-
Pastor Bruce, Pastor Jason.
Man, they're such
awesome
good.
guys.
They're such good folks, and the staff there is just incredible. I think, and it was so cool for me. I've grown up in church to really see like the office admin there, Tessa Pattison, just the amount of work that she puts in to like help pull off a Sunday with volunteers and like watching, all the kids ministry run and the youth groups and like all that. There's so much that happens to make your church run. So it was really cool to see that. But I think ultimately, I love working on my own. I organizations are great. I'm just one of those people that I need a new project all the time to keep my brain stimulated.
You don't want to just go and click the clock and punch in and clock out and be done. You're more creative than that for sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I stepped down from Church on the Hill in January. Before I stepped into church
of 2023.
2023. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I've been out for just a couple months now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So before that, I was full-time in freelance. And even while I was at Church on the Hill, I was still keeping up a lot of my freelance work.
Yeah.
And so now back into freelance. I really focus on documentary style videos.
Yeah.
I really like to sit people down and tell their story. And I love long form content. I love just being able to put someone in front of a camera and just, figure out, every single person you meet on the street has a story. But it's trying to tell that in a way that's interesting, in a way that really captivates and really shows, I feel like God has spoken to me, my calling in life is to use media to help people experience the gospel,
That's awesome.
And so I think that's pulled me, that's why I know Matt Massera really well and get to spend a lot of time with Matt and Josh, out in the homeless communities. Cause those folks have just some incredible stories of where God has showed up. Because there's a lot of folks you see on the streets do know Jesus, and have experienced him, but they're just, they're still out there.
Yeah,
So,
still searching and seeking and trying to figure it out.
yeah, it's awesome.
Okay. Who's an ideal client for you? You actually mentioned like Be Bold would be a documentary style.
Yeah.
Is it anybody though? Is it a person? Is it a company? Is it a ministry?
I think, that's a really good question. I would say my ideal client, obviously I have to put food on the table, right?
Gotta make money.
Yeah. So I love people that I can work with that tell a story, that what they do has a story and that's why I tend to work with a lot of nonprofits, because a lot of what they do has a beautiful story. And, and you can look at, what are you doing and how are you impacting the world and bringing the kingdom down to earth? So, but I do a lot of stuff, maybe pro bono, or I feel like God brings stories into my life. Like end of May, myself and my friend Ryan Unger, who's been a missionary with YWAM for like almost 20 years, he and I are heading out to Africa to tell two stories, two documentaries there that God just kind of brought into our lap, and we both felt like He's calling us to go, and so we're kind of going out there as independents just to tell these stories. Yeah.
What a cool thing. How do you fundraise for that? How do you make the money to pay for that? It's obviously expensive.
Totally.
What do you do?
Yeah, I think this one's been interesting. Church on the Hill was able to support us a little bit to get some plane tickets because flying to Africa is not cheap. Yeah. The nice thing is being in Africa is kind of cheap. Yeah. So it's a pretty inexpensive trip once we're on the ground. But Church on the Hill supported us to get some plane tickets. Yeah. And then we're working with an organization called Path International. They're based out of Bend. They do like sponsor a child programs in northern Uganda and Ethiopia. Yeah. And so they're helping us. They got us, actually someone on their board got us connected to this gentleman, Derek. He's got a beautiful story. He tried to commit suicide when he was a young teen, got exiled from his family, was homeless on the streets of Kampala, the capital city, for almost 10 years. Wow. And then one day was just starving and remembered going to a church, a local church. And so he showed up at this pastor's house, had a meal with the pastors. And then at the end of the meal, they were like, "Hey, we want you to stay here. We want you to live with us." So we lived there for a year. And then they asked him like, "Hey, what do you want to do with your life? What is your goal?" And he was like, "I want to start an orphanage." And so he just did. Just like, no, he felt like, he's like, "I think God's asking me to start an orphanage." And so he's been able to be discipled a little bit. And we know some missionaries that spend half the year in Uganda, half the year here, that were able to go meet him and check out his ministry and like see that it's, legit. Yeah. But this guy who just felt like God asked him to start an orphanage, just started an orphanage. He's got very little support, but he's got 52 kids that he takes care of every day, So, and just, the story of just, his story is beautiful. And then the gal who's on the board of Path International, they sponsor a kid who just so happens to live in the town where Derek is, Masaka. And the kid they sponsor, his phone died. And so he borrowed Derek's phone to text this gal. And so she was like, who's this person? Whose phone are you borrowing? And so that's how she got introduced to Derek. Yeah. And then we met we met this gal, Katie. We met her at my best friend's wedding. Her and my wife were sitting next to each other. I was in the wedding and they did the, like, "What did your husband do?" And Brooke was like, "Oh, my husband does documentary films." And she's like, "No way. We've been praying for someone to tell this guy's story." So just like how God has showed up every single step of the way in this project has been so cool.
There is no coincidence.
No.
The world is big. Totally. 7 billion people in the world. Yep. And there's no coincidence.
Nope. God knows every single one of them. He knows their hearts. And yeah, through Derek and this kid that these folks sponsor, through Katie on the board, down to us, like God knew what needed to happen. And it's been 2 years in the making trying to get out there. We were trying to get out there back in September, October, and they had an Ebola outbreak. So we had to postpone till now. And God just shows up every single step of the way. So yeah.
Sounds like God's about ready to change your life a little bit more as you head there and have faith doing what you're doing there. And I can't wait to see the documentary that you put out.
It's going to be great. We really feel like God's moving, and man, his plans are always so much bigger than ours. Every step of the way, he's like, you're not quite dreaming big enough. It's beautiful.
We impose ourselves with self-limiting beliefs, and God can do all things.
Amen.
Yet we look at ourselves as though we can't, but God. If we just look at God, God can do all things.
Amen. Yeah.
Well, this is really cool. We're going to wrap up here in just a moment, but
sure.
How would somebody reach out to you and learn a little bit more about, video production, media, really how to maybe, hire you possibly.
Sure.
To learn more about you, how to come alongside you, how to watch a documentary that you put together. Totally. Like you've done one with Matt Massera, Be Bold Street Ministry.
Yep.
How do we go see that documentary? Is that out?
Yeah, so that's all out. So the production company that I run is called High Sierra Collective. So you can find us where we have a website and all that stuff. So the documentary we shot with them down in Costa Rica, and then some other little things we've done with them and other projects are all on the website. So
I'm going to put those in the show notes so somebody can just click on the link and learn more about you. If they want to reach out to you, I'm sure they can just message you.
absolutely.
Through that.
Yeah, totally. I love sitting down and talking to people. And everyone's got a story. Everyone's got something to bring to the table. So I love sitting down with people in here. And every person who's listening to this woke up this morning because of the grace of God.
Amen.
Every single person's got a testimony of what God has done in their life, regardless of if they choose to see that or not, just the common grace of we have breath in our lungs right now, So I love sitting down with people and just hearing, how God shows up.
It's been my passion. That's why I do this thing called Conversation with Buddy.
Totally.
Because I really want to hear people's story. Everybody has a story, and it's the thing I love most.
Yeah. Amen.
And we know that in 2 Corinthians 12:9 that Jesus told Paul, "My grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness."
Mm-hmm.
And remember, it's God's grace. It's His grace that helped us wake up this morning. And then what are we going to do with that?
Yeah. Amen.
So, well, brother, Bryce, thanks for being a part of this show.
Buddy, thank you so much. And thank you for what you guys do.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Thank you for your listeners out there listening to this podcast. Again, we'd love to have you share it with family and friends and get back to us and let us know how it's impacted you or somebody you know. If you want to be on the podcast, we'd love to have you. And just reach out. My email is buddyp7@gmail.com. If you'd love to be a part of our Patreon group and help maybe fund this ministry, we'd love to hear from you as well. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.